Hey, Des Moines User Group, this is Terry, and I'm sorry I did not get this video uploaded any sooner. This is from our user group on the 18th, and it was a fantastic group, and I'm just going to let you tune in and watch. Thanks. All right. Well, that was fun. Let's go on to Benjamin. Benjamin is a friend of mine from Dreamforce. We met, I want to say, has it been 3 or 4 years ago, Ben? I'm trying to.
And I want to say 3 years now.
That's what I was thinking.
While. Yeah.
Yeah. And each year we connect, except for this last one, because we obviously didn't have Dreamforce, but just met over lunch, if I recall right. We just had lunch together and made a new friend and have stayed connected from that point on. Ben is a consultant for Internet Creations. They're out of Dallas, Texas. You can correct me if I get any of that wrong.
Dallas and New Jersey. Yeah.
Dallas and New Jersey.
Headquarters are actually in New Jersey, but I live in Dallas.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Awesome. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Ben, and we'll keep going.
All right, perfect. Thank you. I'm assuming you can see the headline image, strategic approach to analytics in Salesforce, right? Cool.
Looks good.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. Today, I'll be talking about strategic approach to analytics in Salesforce. So this is our agenda for today. First, a little introduction. Then I have broken out different sections that I want to talk about. So you see those there, high-level strategic approach, key metrics, data quality, confirmation bias, tips and traps, and then collaboration and alignment. And then lastly, we'll have a summary as well. So first, a little bit about me. Terry already gave a great intro. My name is Benjamin Bratcher. I'm a consultant with Internet Creations. I'm also a platform champion, which was formerly known as Lightning Champion, Trailhead Ranger, 6-time certified. I have a BFA in theater and an MBA in business analytics. So a fun fact, I perform as an actor on the side as well, mostly on stage, but during the pandemic, that's kind of, not been possible. So I've switched to focusing a little bit more on voiceover work, which has been pretty fun. And like we said, I live in Dallas. I also love to ride my road bike. And a fun fact, I grew up in Germany, actually, and moved to the US for college and have been here since. But my parents are American, so that's why I don't have an accent. That question always comes up. If you want to connect with me, I'll put my Twitter and LinkedIn in the chat. Feel free to do so. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, just add a note saying where we met, if you don't mind. I always like to keep track of where I met everyone. All right, so introduction to strategic approach to analytics in Salesforce. So a little background on this topic. During my time at IC, I've been there over a year now. When the pandemic hit, we kind of shifted things around. So in addition to working as a consultant, I took on a role as a content creator in the marketing department. So I began creating a lot of blog posts, customer stories, webinars, things like that. And so I was thinking, one important topic that I think isn't talked about a lot is analytics. So initially, my plan was to write a blog post about technical tips on creating reports and dashboards. But then I went to Trailhead and saw all the great content there is on that and decided, well, why reinvent the wheel when they already have so much great content out there? So instead, I decided to kind of shift my focus and focus more on the strategy behind it. And so then that kind of turned into what we're talking about today. So what the focus is to learn how to craft an analytics strategy in Salesforce and what to consider with that. So how did that happen? Well, I ended up deciding, the best thing to do here would be to tap into the resources I have. So I conducted interviews with 6 leaders at Internet Creations in various departments, and from that created a series of blog posts. And that's what this presentation is based off of. And why? Well, I wanted to take a more strategic perspective with analytics, as I mentioned. And the goal of this is to help people analyze the role that analytics play at their company. So hopefully you have some good takeaways from this. So why are analytics important? Well, first of all, they bring objectivity to a subjective situation. So you might have some thoughts on, how you're performing or what to focus on next at your company. But analytics and data, that actually brings, some good arguments to back your case in those situations. You also can enable yourself to make data-driven decisions, and it also informs the uncertain. So, first topic, high-level strategic approach. What should we focus on first? Well, it's good to note that reporting is key to most organizations. If you're like me, I live more in the technical world of Salesforce. I'm not a developer, I'm an admin consultant, but I'm focused on, things like building automation or lightning pages, things like that is very focused on the technical skills or building a data model. But reporting is sometimes shoved to the side. But the thing to remember is that for the business users, reporting is key because that's how they get all of their data and can track, their performance. So don't lose sight of those KPIs, those key performance indicators when designing your solutions. Another good tip at a high level is to have purpose-built dashboards. Whenever you're building a dashboard, that's how you're most often surfacing information to your users. And so have those dashboards, have a specific purpose. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a later point as well. So with that, start with the end in mind. So when you're designing your solution, a new data model, a new object, consider what the end result will be. What will users actually use this functionality for? Or what are they going to try to get out of it? What are those KPIs they're trying to track? And then a tip, have leaders build their own dashboards so they have a strong understanding of its purpose. That quote there at the bottom is from our CEO, Felisa at Internet Creations. I really love this quote. Basically, she says that and recommends that instead of either her building the dashboards herself or working with an admin to do it, she empowers the other leaders within the organization to build their own dashboards or even work with an admin to build it. That way, they are the ones who are knowledgeable about the analytics and they know exactly why those decisions were made, why they decided to add that report or that dashboard component into it. And so allowing them or enabling them to have that kind of control over their analytics is really useful because then, they are the ones to then pass that on to their individual contributors from there. I really like that tip from Felisa. All right, so key metrics to monitor. So departments have different key performance indicators, as I'm sure you all know, but something to keep in mind is that departments' KPIs can relate to each other as well. So I'll get to that in an example in a second, but before that, I want to talk a little bit about leading indicator and lagging indicator. So a leading indicator is a metric that indicates a performance early on in the process, whereas a lagging indicator is a metric that will show the result of the work later on. So think of it as, an early check-in of how you're doing, and then lagging indicator being, at the end, how do we actually do? So an example of that would be lead generation, for example, might be a leading indicator for sales, but a lagging indicator for marketing. So that's an example of how one department's leading indicator might be another department's lagging indicator. So there is some, cross collaboration that's necessary there, or some interconnectedness. So in this case, for example, sales kind of take over, when the lead is generated. But for marketing, they've done a lot of work already behind the scenes before that, whether that's building the website, creating ad campaigns, or different things like that. So for them, the lead generation is more of a lagging indicator because that shows the success they've had or the work they've put into it. So this slide shows you some key metrics by department. So again, in these interviews with these leaders at IC, I asked them, what are some key metrics that you focus on? So if you're, new to KPIs or, haven't had a chance to talk with your own organization, maybe this will give you some ideas for different business units on what they might focus on. And this is certainly not exhaustive, and every organization is different, but these are just some options. So for example, under CEO, that's like the high level, highest level of the organization, the executive level. So the focus there is on revenue, net income, employee and customer satisfaction. An interesting point to that one, though, is that during the pandemic, our CEO actually pivoted from revenue recognition to cash receivables. And that was because, like many businesses, ours was impacted to a certain extent by the pandemic. And so we wanted to focus more on those cash receivables to make sure that we could pay the bills and the salaries and all that was coming in. And there's actually a Salesforce Einstein AI blog post that Felisa, our CEO, was featured in, because we use Einstein to help us track that and predict the likelihood that a customer would actually pay their invoices. So I thought that was kind of an interesting example of pivoting with those metrics. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you get the idea. Sales is more focused on activities and opportunities and how much is closing, what are the renewals. Marketing's more interested in growing the customer base, opportunity, pipeline, and generation. PS is focused on billability. Product is, that department's actually more focused on the support of our products, because we are both an ISV and a consulting partner. So we have some apps on the App Exchange as well. But that's, more focused on the support part of it. And then R&D, of course, is all focused on how can we make the best new features or best new products, and really focus on that. All right, so importance of data quality. So this one I think is really important, and I'm actually glad we had the earlier presentation, because I think this fits in pretty well too. But data is really important, right? We are in the business of CRM, customer relationship management. It's all about gathering data, creating a 360 customer experience, as we hear Salesforce say all the time. So clean data and quality data is the first step. And that's the first step towards better decision-making and better business outcomes in the end, as you can see in that diagram. Well, without reliable data, your dashboards are less effective. And that, of course, in the end will affect your decision-making and the outcomes. So the clean data and quality data is very important. So George, our director of sales, had a great quote I liked here. Bad data is not only a technology problem, but also a people problem. So how can we fix or avoid bad data? What can we do about this? Well, there's 7 steps that I was able to identify in these conversations I was having. So the first is exception analytics. So think of this as maybe an exception dashboard to identify, quote, crappy data, or keep people on task to identify data integrity issues. Maybe they haven't updated the close date on an opportunity and it's already past due, but it's not closed. We need to make sure to keep that up to date. Or same thing on a case. The due date's passed. We haven't closed the case, so let's update that. Howard, who's our director of product, focused on case cleanliness checklist, which ensures that certain fields and steps were completed when working on a case. So kind of having a guided process as you're working through something. Or maybe you could also schedule exception reports, so that way you only get that report when you actually need to look at it. For example, I have one set up to where if I send a case comment and there's no time entry associated to that same case, it shows up in a report and is sent to me. But I never see it if I don't need to look at it. Another one would be executive support. So this is one I can't stress enough, but if you have an executive who's championing data quality, that will make a huge difference. If the data isn't in Salesforce, it doesn't exist. That's a common mantra, and I think that really kind of rings true with this point as well. There's an example for example, that came up in these conversations. One of these leaders worked at an organization previously that had a problem with putting data into Salesforce or into their CRM, and they might have used Excel or even Post-it notes, I know, shocking, to track that information. Well, the lack of data then in the CRM, which is kind of usually the source of truth, will make reporting and business decisions incredibly difficult. So you have to make sure to have that process in place. So how do you get there? Well, initiatives is one way. So initiatives would be to promote good data and develop strategic plans to resolve and improve a difficulty, whether it's related to data or not. It could be an initiative for other things as well. An example of this recently at IC, for consultants, we had a case management initiative where the leadership team would review cases with consultants to make sure everyone's on track, make sure it's a manageable workload, and that we have everything we need to be successful, and that we have a good plan in place to ensure a good customer experience and a good result at the end of that case. So that's an example of an initiative to ensure quality data and then also a good customer experience. So as a leader, you have to lead by example as well. So, with these initiatives, leaders have to kind of take that first step and advocate for it. Another way to fix it is documentation. So documenting standard operating procedures is really important. That allows for everyone in the organization to follow the same processes and provide right guidance on what good data looks like. For example, we've used Quip or are now in the process of implementing Speckit. At a previous company, I used WalkMe. So there's a lot of great sales enablement tools that will either guide you through processes or give quick definitions to fields or different components or processes, whatever it may be. That way you have that information in that standard operating procedure right where you need it, when they need it. And it saves a lot of time on easier onboarding, training, and adoption. So I love tools like that just make that process easier. Training and callouts. So as we said, bad data is not only a technology problem, but also a people problem. So training is crucial to address that. Another thing, what I mean by callouts is, for example, if you use dashboard snapshots, you could @mention somebody or in a dashboard or report and kind of give them some context to what you're seeing and then hold them accountable to updating data. Or having training and regular reviews with the team is also important. And another one is empowering the team to understand why the data is important. If there's a difference between saying, hey, make sure you update this one field at this point and leave it at that. Okay, cool. I guess I have to do this because it's my job. Well, if you add to that and say, well, it's important because if we don't have this piece of data, we lose all of this reporting that we want to do on that process, and we can't make decisions from that. So empowering your users to understand will ensure that they care more about the data as a result and likely will do a better job. Gamification. This is a fun one, I think. So the idea behind this is to gamify data entry or somehow make it gamified so that you are incentivized to enter data better. So at IC, for example, we use something called Hoopla to display metrics and leaderboards on TVs, and it'll play a person's theme if they hit a certain threshold or objective. Another one is an internal app called Game of Fields, where users earn points for entering data on prioritized fields. A quote from Howard that I really liked was, you're never going to be as accurate as you were in the moment. So if you try to go back to it later, you're just not going to be as accurate. So rather than treating data quality as a separate task in your day-to-day work, encourage people to integrate it into their work right away. And then to do that, it also helps if easier data entry, if data entry is easier. So create less friction when users are creating records. Maybe be more strategic with validation rules. Only use that for crucial key pieces of data that need to be added, that don't hold up your users too much with those validation rules. Maybe standardization would be good to ensure cleaner data. So for example, you could use a pick list as opposed to an open text field in certain situations, so that when you report on it, pick lists are, there's certain selections as opposed to just a bunch of combinations of who knows what. But I would recommend to avoid multi-select pick lists because those are a struggle. I'm sure you've experienced that. High touch field should be at the top of the page. You can utilize the path to help visualize the progress of the record. And then maybe there's some components you could add to the utility bar to make that a lot easier. For example, we have a component called Time Tracker, which was custom developed to enter our time, and it's on the utility bar so we can easily get to it from anywhere, and it makes entering that data so much easier. All right. And we'll get to questions at the end. So please, if you have any, feel free to put those in the chat. I probably should have said this earlier, but we'll get to those at the end. All right, so the next topic is confirmation bias. So first of all, what is confirmation bias? Well, I put a quote from APA in here, or a definition, I should say. Confirmation bias is the tendency to look for information that supports rather than rejects one's preconceptions, typically by interpreting evidence to confirm existing beliefs while rejecting or ignoring any conflicting data. That's a lot. So put simply, confirmation bias is when you approach analysis or research with a preconceived idea of what the results will be, and that can influence your work. So for example, maybe you're Googling, and like me, you're obsessed with Tesla. I'll admit it, I have a problem. So you might search, why is Tesla the best car? Well, you actually are displaying confirmation, or I, in this case, am displaying confirmation bias here because I'm already saying Tesla is the best car. Well, the search results are going to be articles showing that Tesla is the best car. So maybe that's not quite the best way to search for that. So that's what confirmation bias means. So why is this a bad thing? Well, you approach your analysis or research in a way that supports your position or opinion or bias, however you want to put that. You also lose the chance to approach it with an open mind, a chance to let your research influence your decision-making, as opposed to letting your opinions influence the decisions you make. And it's subjective rather than objective. And you might risk making poor business decisions due to bias. So what are ways that this might manifest itself? Well, making the data look a certain way. Have you ever had a boss tell you, well, can you make the data look a little bit better, or make it, I don't know, it doesn't really fit what I want, so can you just make it look better? That's confirmation bias. When people who believe similarly work together, yes, people. That's why diversity is so important in a workplace, and diversity of opinion as well. The first person to speak sets the tone of the meeting. So, for example, have you ever been in a meeting where no one wants to speak up because maybe they just don't want to be the first one to say something? Finally, someone does say something, and then everyone else just agrees with it because that's the first thing that came up.
I'm doing these.
Thanks for the contribution, Karen. Well, anyway, this is an example also, I think, of confirmation bias because everyone just kind of tags on when maybe it would be better to have it in a format where everyone can share opinions without kind of having that initial comment be the leading one. Here's an example. So internet creations is known for expertise in service, mostly because we have all of these apps based on Service Cloud. But the fact is we don't only do work in Service Cloud. As consultants, we work on Sales Cloud, Experience Cloud, and others. So that's an example of confirmation bias. And this is also something internally as well. Or maybe in product management, if you fall in love with a product idea and you just desperately want to do this new product or new feature, and so then you go in and try to justify making that change or working on that when it's probably more so based on anecdotal evidence. That's another example of confirmation bias. So 7 ways to actively work against confirmation bias. If confirmation bias exists, try and change it. Well, how? Ask why and challenge assumptions. So don't take the data at face value. Ask why and dig deeper to find the reason. So when you're presented with something, don't just accept it as, truth. Find out why. Get others' perspectives. This can be a perspective from a peer or even an outsider, but a fresh perspective can help a lot of time to maybe help change the way you're thinking about something. Be the change you want to see. I think that goes without saying. Get more data. So additional data can sometimes provide new insight or confirmation of assumptions, but know when it's enough data, because you don't want to get analysis paralysis and just keep analyzing and never be satisfied with what you have. At some point, you just have to kind of know when to, stop and accept the data for what it is. Also, challenge your data. So review the data source, make sure the data looks accurate, review any filters or timeframes, et cetera, to make sure it makes sense the way maybe the report was run, for example. Or be willing to challenge the data and also tweak it. Listen before forming an opinion. I like this one. So in an effort to hear all sides of the topic, listen to others before forming an opinion, and don't, just come to conclusions early on. And also trial and error. So follow a scientific testing by changing one variable and reevaluating and seeing, what changed and how that might have changed your perception of it. And that way you can incrementally improve and continue to make progress. And I like Howard's quote here, data is the weapon against confirmation bias. All right, I know that's a lot. So pivoting a little bit, now we'll talk about tips and traps with analytics. This could be a whole presentation unto itself, in my opinion. And I highly encourage you to read the blog post specific to this because there's a lot of really good tips. But in the interest of time, I've tried to consolidate it and just give you some of my top picks for these. So number 1, consider the data model and reporting from the beginning. I referenced this early on a little bit, but keep reporting in mind when you're designing the data model. You need to make sure that the data model will support the reporting needs of your business. So as we know, if you've used reports in Salesforce, there are some limitations there, right? You have to have object relationships. Usually you can create custom report types to, make some things work, but there are some limits. So if you've come up with a brilliant data model that in terms of the technology works really well and is great, but the users can't get to their data easily or even at all, maybe that's not the best data model, right? So keep that in mind. Next actions from reports is important. And what I mean by that is a next action refers to an action that you can take as a result of changes to metrics in the report. So if you're looking, for example, or you've designed a report and you have it, you have to say, well, if this number changes, I will do X. If the opportunity pipeline for our quarter drops below the goal, I'm going to do this thing to address that, right? So if there isn't a next action, you won't look at the report as often as you need to. So make sure there is a next step for you to take. This was a unique one, and I really like this. I had never thought of this before, but remind users of the goal by renaming dashboard component titles as questions. So this way, they're reminded immediately of why are we even tracking this. So an example would be take a report that I would probably label as customer growth last quarter. Well, maybe the title in the dashboard should be, how many customers did we acquire last quarter? It's a small change, but it does kind of reinforce that goal that you should have in mind. And in fact, ask yourself the top questions you want to answer before you even create the dashboard. And you can use those questions as the titles in your reports or in the dashboard components. So analytics limitations in Salesforce. There are some, if you're just, for example, using reports and dashboards out of the box. So understand what those limitations are and don't be afraid to go to other products to maybe solve some of those. And don't try to make it work in reports and dashboards and waste your time. And by other products, I mean, maybe it could be something like Tableau or, other like Power BI or other visualization and reporting tools, or even Excel or something like that. Just know when to call it quits and take the data elsewhere. Review dashboards frequently, not just when you need to make a decision. Because if you review it frequently, there might be new insight that you might get serendipitously. And if you only review it when you're making a decision, you're kind of limiting the exposure to that and the chance to get more insight. And then create your reports and dashboards to be evergreen and dynamic. So by this, I mean, with dynamic, for example, you can create dynamic dashboards or dashboard filters on the analytics, or set the filters up so that it shows only my records or my team's records. So make it dynamic so that it makes sense and more people can use the dashboards and reports. And by evergreen, I mean using filters that are based on relative values as opposed to hard coding values into it. I started out as an accidental admin and a solo admin. So a lot of what I've learned has come through trial and error, and also some, trailhead and mentorship and things like that. But this was one I learned fairly early on, was that, for example, rather than writing or typing into the filter January 1st, 2021 to December 31st, 2021, you could put current calendar year. And that way, when the year turns, that report will still work and you don't have to spend a ton of time updating all of these reports and dashboards. So that blog post right there is the one with more tips. I'll put that in the chat as well. I see Terry put the key takeaways blog in there. You can also get to it from there. So lastly, cross-departmental collaboration and alignment. So alignment and collaboration across various departments is crucial to your success, because without it, everyone would operate in silos. So you want to make sure that everyone works together for the overall success of the business. So ways that you might be able to ensure collaboration and alignment, and companies do this, in a lot of different ways. These are just some examples. But you might have a company kickoff at the beginning of the year for everyone to align on the goals for the year, reflect on the performance of last year, and just be on the same page, all together as a company. Or you might have bi-weekly check-ins to discuss goals and challenges. This could be within your own team, or maybe even across different teams or departments that work often together, like marketing and sales, for example. Or consider creating joint dashboards with shared KPIs. So when I mentioned lead generation, for example, being a lagging and leading indicator for marketing and sales, maybe they could have a shared dashboard where they can track the leads generated and the opportunities created, because they kind of coexist within those key performance indicators. Also, of course, ad hoc and weekly meetings between department leaders are important to make sure they're in alignment with initiatives that they have or plans for the quarter or the year. But it's also worth noting that organic collaboration should be maintained in addition to these structured meetings. So you don't want to just have structured meetings and, not have organic collaboration, because you definitely will have to have times where you just come together and meet rather than, having a structured meeting. So in summary, I know this is a lot of information we've gone through, and hopefully you're still with me at this point. But strategic approach to analytics is a crucial puzzle piece to an organization's success. And so by making data-informed decisions, that empowers you with confidence in your decision-making and in the future path of your business, and enables you to inform uncertainty through data-driven decisions. And without data and analytics, companies are unable to head in a specific direction with great confidence, or they might not have, the backing or the resources, or the backing behind the reasoning of their choices. But they do get that with data and analytics. But that's not enough. And strategy is the key word here, because even if you do have the data and analytical capabilities, if you don't have a strategic approach to analytics, you might be giving up potential advantages as well. All right, so that's what I have for this. I'd love to open it up for questions or comments. And I can always jump back in the slides as well if there is anything specific. But I just put the link to the whole blog post series. So you'll see all individual blog posts on that page. I just put that in the chat. So feel free to check that out if you want to get more into detail as well.
Hey, Benjamin, this is George. Great presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. Could you talk a little bit about resistance to change, especially at the executive level? Sometimes people don't want to admit that there is a problem, and people can be defensive, and that gets into something you have no control of, which is the culture of that organization, et cetera. But could you talk about some of the strategies you have to, we want to have an honest assessment. We want to see ourselves so that we can all collectively improve. Could you just talk about your methodology? So getting the defenses down so people can actually get past those biases to achieve results?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that is a very difficult and also like a very difficult way. It's difficult to navigate that in a way that it doesn't come off as maybe hurtful to an executive if they are kind of feeling that way, right? And I think there's two different ways to approach it, and it depends on, so on the one hand, if you're an internal user, that can sometimes be even more difficult because you're below that executive in the hierarchy. And so sometimes an executive, if they aren't willing to have that, open mind or have a conversation, they might not even want to listen to you. So in that case, maybe if you have a manager or director between that, going to them and having that conversation so that you can get their support to then go to the executive to have that conversation. That way you're having an ally in that conversation and can kind of, tackle it together. Otherwise, I think maybe a more effective way oftentimes is having an external consultant, like a business consultant, come in who is a third party. So there's not any past history or maybe bad blood or difficulties there to navigate. They're coming in as a fresh person and can act as an authority figure that maybe an executive who's not receptive will feel more comfortable engaging with and taking advice from. Because yes, if you don't have that support from an executive, it can be difficult. But I think the key either way is to try to make clear, like I did, I think the data quality slide is really good for that one. But try to make clear the chain of events that data quality results in, and why it would be advantageous to the business to implement these things. And that, I think, goes for the entire presentation, whether that's data quality, standard operating procedures and documentation, or even addressing confirmation bias. It can be a tough conversation, but I think if people should be willing to have those conversations on either side of the table. And I think you're better as a result when those conversations happen, but it can be uncomfortable and potentially, I guess, risky depending on the reaction of it. I hope that addresses that question.
I was gonna say too, George, one of the things that I frequently will do is just change how I address them, change my approach, because I can't change them, but I can change the way that I am asking questions of them. If I really like to try to get things to be their idea, even though I might be kind of spoon feeding them in a direction. And one of the things that Ben, you said that I thought was really, really interesting there that I took a note of was ensuring there's a next step for the reports, specifically getting back to the analytics side of it. If an executive's asking you to create a specific report, there's nothing wrong with asking, help me understand how you'll use this, what information are we looking to gain? So sometimes it's that just asking the why question, kind of approaching it, but help me understand what you're looking to achieve. And then I will frequently respond to things like that. Have you thought about looking at the data perhaps this way? And sometimes you might give them a good idea. Sometimes they'll shoot you down. But it's a way of kind of, to me, it's a matter of how you approach people. And the advantage you have as being an employee, where someone like me coming in as a consultant, there's advantages on both sides of that, but the person much better than a consultant would. And frequently you're able to go into those meetings or the understanding their personality and can plan your approach based off of that. That can sometimes be helpful as well.
Yeah, that's really great, Terry. I just wanted to add one point to what you said, and that was asking why. That's so important, and I want to stress that and add to it to say that as an admin, consultant, developer, whatever you are, if you aren't asking the why and getting to the root cause or the reason behind the request, you're not doing your job to the full extent, right? You're not hired as a person to just do the work and not think about it. You're hired because you have a good understanding and critical assessment skills, and you can figure out why and see if that is actually the best path forward. So I think just empower yourself to ask those questions. And they are difficult and sometimes uncomfortable, but they're really important too.
Yeah. Now, if you go to your executive and ask why, and you're kind of doing it with the tone of, well, that's a stupid idea, why would you do this? I can guarantee you're going to get shot down. But if you're asking in a way that is seeking to understand, I think you can get you'll get a lot further. And the other thing that I wanted to bring out that I picked up on, Ben, that you said was, I forget what slide it was on, but you made reference to the fact that admins are leaders. And I think that's a concept that we frequently forget, that we are leaders. We may not have the title, but that doesn't mean that we aren't leaders. And to understand that about who we are and what we do, that can change our approach to our work. And people are relying on that on Salesforce and CRM to make good business decisions, and you're the gatekeeper to that. And so understand your role, I think is really something that's really important for us to capture about our work.
Terry, this is Julie, can I comment as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one thing I know that kind of helps me or early on in my career, kind of as a consultant and admin, et cetera. I think one thing, and I agree with what Terry just said too, but don't assume they know.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume, I don't mean this bad, I've got some clients on the call, so don't take offense to it, but just assume they don't know. They assume they know nothing. I think that has helped me tremendously and coming up with solutions and just guiding them in the right approach. And the other thing too, with the small group I'm working with right now, pictures tell everything. So if you need them to see it differently, don't throw up on them, but put out there, the reports dashboards, because that's really what's going to get their attention. So everything that Ben just went over, kudos, like great stuff. So.
Yeah. Good question. Any other questions that you have?
I'm going to go ahead and like double and triple down on all of that. I think it's so important to understand that all of this reporting and analytics are downstream from your business process, and knowing your business rules inside and out, and even when you think you know them, double checking and triple checking and asking why, like a curious 4-year-old, is just invaluable, and the more that you can do that, and you can build trust with, with your organization, with your executives, with your peers, the more and more that you're seen as a partner, and that's also invaluable for yourself, just in your career trajectory and in your ability to, foster that kind of innovative thinking within your organization. So just never underestimate that. At times I do, and it comes back to bite me. So it's really nice to see that all kind of bundled together in this presentation. So big round of applause to you, Benjamin. This was great.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And then Benjamin, if I could just follow up one more time on this, something and again, I'm looking at this from the point of view of a consultant as an outsider coming into an organization, right?
Yeah.
Task, and then you leave. So you don't know all the culture and all the politics. You're going to learn that the hard way sometimes. But my question is, one of the things I have found successful is be Joe Friday, just the facts, right? Here's your date. This report has not been used in the past year. Okay. So these specific things, they're not subjective. They're very objective. These fields are not being used, etc. Could you talk about some of the top 3 or 4 areas that you go to? Because I'm still relatively new to this, where pretty much everybody has room to improve. So you can start with those small wins and build that momentum, because when you fix that, now you're getting the buy-in from the leadership. They see, okay, this is making the org faster. We are getting faster close rates, etc. Where do you look first? I know the answer is it depends, but do you have any key areas that you would recommend for somebody who's relatively new like me?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it certainly does depend, like you said, but there is a tool. I'm trying to pull it up to get you the right name, but it basically will scan your entire org and then give recommendations on what they think you should update, or what might not be in use, or I think it might be called, I think it's the usage app or something. I don't know. That might be different.
Optimizer, Salesforce Optimizer.
Optimizer. Thank you, Terry. Yes. Mm-hmm. So using the Optimizer, if you are new to the org, and so I guess to preface, if you are new to the org and you are on this engagement for a specific reason, then of course that should probably be the focus. But if you're looking for other quick wins or other optimizations, then Salesforce Optimizer is really good. It will scan everything. It will show you fields that are not being used, profiles that have no users assigned to them, and much more. So that's a really good tool. And I think in general, taking time in a new engagement to understand their processes, how they use Salesforce is probably the best way to approach it. So even having an end user walk you through what they do, and then you'll pick up on things that can be improved. I know from experience that another quick win would be if they're in Lightning, or if they're moving to Lightning. A lot of Lightning migrations are kind of just like, let's get it to Lightning so it works. But the details not spent on the Lightning pages, or even the Lightning actions configured in the page layout, or things like that, or even other components that are just completely new to Lightning, like related records components, things that, or related list single item, things that a classic user would never think of. There's usually, I think, quick wins there as well, where you can add really good value to the user. Terry, do you have any other thoughts or things to add?
No, Optimizer was really kind of that. There's and George, we can talk about this too, but there's a few things that I generally want to see if I'm engaging in a brand new org. That Optimizer is one that I frequently look at. I always want to see where they are with the licenses, what licenses they have, and where do they stand with data storage. Those are probably the three things that I will almost always seek to understand right off the bat. But
thank you so much.
Terry, the only other thought I had on this, and it's related, but I do it more when I'm getting ready to train a group or help them, but I always like to grab a few people from the user base, and not all that are like super users or that really love Salesforce. I like to bring in a mix to get the naysayers and help get buy-in or help learn, kind of dig a little deeper. And it could help in this too, but I know it helps me tremendously in trying to develop training and help with the end user experience. But it might have you might be able to play with that a little bit with kind of this topic too. But I mean, don't discount them, I guess, too, because I think they bring a lot to the table. Yeah, good or bad, but they can help you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Other questions? Feedback, thoughts?
Hey, this is Sean. Maybe a quick comment. One, echo all the thanks for sharing this. It's good, insightful stuff. My comment is around a feature that Salesforce calls dynamic dashboards. We've run into a bit of an issue with that because it's a licensing constraint kind of thing where they will happily sell you more of those. But the mantra behind a dynamic dashboard points me to a belief that I wanted other people's maybe thoughts on. It feels like because dynamic dashboards, which is an idea that the person running the dashboard would see the data that they are able to see, is what is called a dynamic dashboard. A regular dashboard is something that a user would create and it would run, like your choices are, I can run it as myself, I can run it as someone else, or I can run it as this dynamic thing, which means it will only pull in the things that the person that's actually running it as. It kind of implies that this whole dashboarding thing in Salesforce is sort of a user by user driven activity. Like I go create my own, and if we want to do this thing where we create a dashboard on someone else's behalf for a group of people to use, you run into this thing of, well, that's what a dynamic dashboard is for. What's interesting is that you don't get very many of those by default, depending on if you're unlimited or enterprise or different editions sort of factor into that. We've just had some challenges where it feels like this idea of a dynamic dashboard is a thing I would like to use, but I don't want to pay a ton of money to be able to use that capability to create dashboards for groups of users. I don't know if anybody else has similar thoughts or patterns that they've seen with that capability.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the limit on dynamic dashboards is one I've had to face myself, and it's frustrating for sure. I wish you could have more. But I think dynamic dashboards really shine when you're creating a dashboard and you want it to be specific to the person's metrics that's viewing it. So for example, like a personal metric performance dashboard. So then you would set dynamic dashboards, and you can set all reports that are source reports for that dashboard to run on the filter my records or my team's records. So it's not everything they have access to, but it's whatever is pertinent to themselves, right? So that way, when it's a dynamic dashboard, they're the running user, and so they view it as my records. I think that's the key to dynamic dashboards. If you are creating a dashboard that is showing like a department's metrics or the organization's metrics overall, it makes much more sense to select a running user, like if you have an admin user or someone like that, and then everyone can see it and see the same data. So there's like some different use cases there, but I would consider with dynamic dashboards also the filters on the source reports. And then in addition to that, you can also even add filters on the dashboard itself if you want. That's a little bit of a different concept, but there you could have a dashboard that is completely open and have the filters on the dashboards that filter all the components. I hope that answers your question. But if anyone else has comments.
That's a good angle too. Thanks.
Yeah, another thing I will do too is I don't let users create dynamic dashboards. I keep those to the admin only because there are so few of them.
Hey, control we are introducing, but do not have
That's right. You're the leader. Good questions. Anything else? All right. Ben, fantastic job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Always a privilege to connect with you again. So that's very, very good.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the opportunity. I've enjoyed, and thanks for everyone attending and listening. I appreciate that.